Hi, everyone. We would like to welcome you to our conversation on the future of retail and sustainability. My name is Ivani Patel, and I'm a partner at the Ember Company. The Ember Company is a diversified holding company pioneering an investment and advisory business model for the consumer commerce industry. We ignite big ideas in the industry through our three platforms, the Ember Lab, the Ember Fund, and the Bonfire Group, where we work with companies spanning from early stage consumer brands all the way on to multi-billion dollar conglomerates. Before we get started here, I would like to thank our host, Hudson and Broad. For those of you who don't know Hudson and Broad, they offer leading innovation and original concepts in fixture design for retail presentations and merchandise branding solutions. They also work with brands to design solutions for custom projects and installations. A big thank you to the team at Hudson and Broad for bringing us together for this conversation. I know everybody's really excited, so let's get started. Sustainability is a buzzword that is front and center in the world of fashion in today's world. Today, we will explore what sustainability means in fashion and how sustainability is driving change in retail. Before we begin, I would love for each one of our panelists to quickly introduce themselves. Aaron, I'm going to let you kick it off from here.
Thanks, Ivani. I'm really excited to be a part of the discussion today. Aaron Batista, I'm with the Bonfire Group. I'm one of the founding partners with a background in retail operations, strategic planning, and brand expansion. Thank you.
Bjorn.
Good afternoon, everyone. Likewise, I'm very happy to be here. Looking forward to our little talk here. I'm the Chief Product and Supply Chain Officer for a company called Untuckit, where I run design, technical design, production, and product development. I'm also a part-time adjunct professor currently in the master program at Parsons that just started a year ago. And I'm very happy to be with you here today.
And last but not least, Lisa.
Hi there. Thank you so much for putting this on. My name is Lisa Morales-Hellebo, and I am co-founder of the Worldwide Supply Chain Federation, the largest and fastest growing grassroots global supply chain community. We are on every continent except for Antarctica, and in 3 years have grown to over 33,000 people in our network and 3,600 members. I am also co-founder and managing GP at Refashion Ventures. It's an early stage venture fund investing in companies that are refashioning global supply chains.
Thank you all for taking the time to be here today. You all come from different parts of the industry, which I think is important because I think sustainability spans the entire industry, starting from raw material to production, to supply chain, to retail and e-commerce, all the way to shipping, logistics, returns, overstocked product, really touches every piece of the industry in different ways. So I'd love to kick this conversation off by, understanding what sustainability means to each one of you in your areas of expertise. I would love to kick it off with you, Bjorn. How do you think about sustainability when you're thinking about product and merchandising?
Well, I mean, I like to think about it from a perfect world perspective, of course, that we already are in this circular economy, and we are using sustainable materials that is either derived from regenerative sources, etc. I like to think that we are using trims and packaging that are either biodegradable or degradable in some form, or we don't use plastic at all. But again, that is not really the reality. So if you look at it a little bit from a perspective, what you do in your day-to-day work, of course, I try, and like many other people in the industry, we try to find as sustainable fabrics as we can. It's not always available to us. There might be restrictions from different perspective. There might be restrictions in regards to aesthetics, that there's not enough of organic cotton fabrics to be used, or any other restrictions. And of course, also not all material are readily available, being biodegradable or sustainable. So, but I think gradually we are moving into an economy where we start to contemplate those choices much carefully. And that's, I think, what I think of in merchandising and product choices is really how can we do this more sustainably, and how can we make better choices with materials and trims and packaging, etc. So that's really where my thought goes from a pure merchandising perspective.
So once we have the product, Lisa, let's think about that supply chain. Would love to hear your thoughts on sustainability and within the context of supply chain.
Sure thing. I think there's two ways that people are approaching this. It's either trying to iteratively improve the existing or just focus on building an entirely new paradigm. And I think I love that quote by Dan Millman: the secret of change is to focus all your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. So I think that is where everyone's energy should be focused in a perfect world. We are investing in companies that are leading that change because it actually, for the first time in history, is cheaper and faster for us to build a new paradigm from the ground up than it is to try to retrofit, especially this fashion supply chain that touches every other industry on the planet. And going node by node, there's intentional opacity there. So a lot of companies, just due to COVID, are starting to look at localization and smaller batch on demand, clawing things back to local production for more commodity type items, t-shirts, basics, or even fast fashion. I think the most sustainable supply chain is the one that is only producing what has been purchased rather than this global volume production and redistribution. We're really running into a lot of pushback on people being scared of the unit economics. The big resounding response is, well, we can never compete with labor cost overseas. Well, of course not. But when you actually model the financials, the unit economics of producing here with substantially higher labor costs becomes reduced. If you're selling through, you have zero markdowns, you don't have as much marketing costs and budget, you cut out the global logistics and infrastructure. It actually, some models that we've been working on with Gerber show that it's 6% more margin on locally produced products.
It's great. So, Aaron, I'm going to let you take it from there because Lisa touched a little bit on, selling and retail. What are your thoughts from a retailer perspective?
Yeah, I think just as Lisa was saying, it's not what you've done that you should be trying to take credit for today. It's what you do next. It's the action that you take. And I think it's really interesting for the retail field group to understand the whys of sustainability and ensuring that they're educated on the brand and the brand story and the brand direction. Sustainability has the tendency to be a bit of a buzzword right now, and it's truly not a buzzword. It's actually a survival word, and I don't see this as anything but the evolution of people waking up and realizing we just have so much stuff. We're producing so much stuff. And to both Bjorn and Lisa's point, how do you produce that more responsibly? How do you have eye on the environment while you're doing it? And then when it gets to the shop floor, how is that being communicated to both the person working your brand and also the consumer, so that the consumer is understanding your brand's point of view regarding the environment, regarding sustainability, regarding transparency.
So, Aaron, I think you said something really interesting there, right? Taking sustainability from being a buzzword, so it's something that maybe you put on your website or something that you talk about in the press, to making it a survival word, making it core and authentic to your brand. How do you think about doing that if you're a brand in this day and age? And I think, Lisa, I would love to hear from you, because I think you also said something interesting, right? It's not about fixing the old sometimes, it's about building the new. So if you were a brand, whether a legacy brand or a new brand, how would you be thinking about this?
Yeah, I think that focusing on emerging technologies, not fighting the innovations that are rapidly accelerating currently, it's mind-boggling to me. Every day I see amazing new founders that are building what's needed, and yet they're trying to sell into the existing brands and retailers, and they don't get it. They're scratching their head. Well, this is something that our designers would push back on. Um, you can fight it as long as you want, but really it's the only way for your business to survive, and it's the only way for us humans to survive. So they're the only companies that will survive are the ones that are rapidly adopting and experimenting with these new innovations around circular regenerative textiles, around on-demand production, around customization and personalization, and really one of the most interesting things I think that brands are not understanding is this collaborative dialogue with their consumers. That there's innovations in machine learning and AI that allow for anyone to use images as their mood board for inspiration. This one company I've been advising called Savitude, you create your mood board and then you create kind of your own visual weighted algorithm off of each image set and say, this is an inspiration for design, this is an inspiration for structure, for color, for trend, and hit generate designs. It actually generates flats of ideation of what your designs would look like coming out of that inspiration. It's game changing. It really allows anyone to be creative and to send those flats to pattern makers to produce actual products. So when your consumers can actually co-create and collaborate within the creative process, what does that mean for brands? Which types of brands will be adopting this? And what does it mean for your trying to predict the future? I think we all need to teach the world we need to throw out the crystal ball. The crystal ball hasn't served us. We need to build a better infrastructure that delivers the promise of only producing what's needed, producing it circularly, and engaging with your audience in a real meaningful way rather than forced customer acquisition costs.
And Bjorn, how do you think about getting the buy-in from designers and, you know, all the other people within a brand that you need buy-in from as you're trying to make your brand more sustainable and make it authentic or core to what you're building?
Well, I mean, this is a little bit of the issue we have with sustainability in general, and I think also one of the reasons we're moving too slow in the process against sustainability is that there's always we live in a capitalistic world. Of course, all business is driven by profit and profit margin on product, and it's as Lisa very well pointed out, there's plenty of opportunities to launch businesses today on a sustainable model, and really embrace sustainability and use this also as a general brand message for your brand. It's considerably harder for established legacy type of businesses who maybe have been operating for 20 years or more to all of a sudden turn the business 100% sustainable, because it doesn't only involve product choices, it also involves how does our current product concept and what we do fit into sustainability. Is it possible for us to source sustainable materials in order for that to broadcast our message to the audience as we do? And also it opens questions such as supply chain. If I'm currently based in a legacy model with existing and often very substantial supplier network, how do I take all these vendors, which might be 30, 50 different vendors, and turn them into sustainable vendors? And how do I find all these factories that are sustainable? And it's unfortunately today, there is not a lot of manufacturers who I would grade as A plus in sustainability, yet I have to produce a certain number of units, etc. So it's really the march towards sustainability is typically very slow because as you're gearing up for sustainability at the same time, you can't really touch the profitability aspect of your product. So you have to be quite creative. It's not, at least not significantly. So you have to kind of gradually turn your business towards sustainability, and it takes some time and it's hard work. And unfortunately, many people believe that it's free of charge. It's not. Sustainability costs money, and it's not always affordable for all businesses. The really soldiers on the front line here who is doing this and are sustainable are usually new economy companies. They're not the old companies, but we need the old companies to turn around. We need the giants in the industry to really put themselves on a path towards sustainability. And looking at what we have accomplished the last 5 years, it's really discouraging because we're not moving fast enough and we're not turning the curve fast enough. So I am a little bit pessimistic, although I'm optimistic too, of course, but I'm a little pessimistic in all these discussions because I feel unless we have really laws and regulations that are implemented by governments around the world in regards to recycling and taking back what you produce, and in regards to using toxic chemicals, in regards to sourcing responsibly and paying a living wage, not a minimum wage. Unless we address all this issue on a legal level, I think the process, we're not going to meet the climate change goals of 2030. It's not going to happen. And I think industry has long called for radical action, but it's not happening. We keep on having these conferences every year and nothing really happens, and that's not for all. There are many companies who are very good at this, but the industry at large is not doing anything, and it's kind of discouraging. And I think the only way to attack these problems is unfortunately laws and regulation, and to rely on the good nature of people does not pay off, because that's what we do in the last decade.
I absolutely agree. And I think, sorry, I'm jumping in here because this is
Yeah,
really
you
something
should
I'm
jump in.
passionate about. I too am sick of the greenwashing and people sitting back and writing more and more white papers talking about the problem. We know the problem. The problem is inaction. And so I have spent the last 6 years seeking out the most inclined to move and the industries and companies that most believe in a strategic approach to actually deploying what's needed as opposed to just talking about it. And I'll just mention Gerber Technology has been fantastic. They have a micro factory in their New York office that within 1,200 square feet, you can have a consumer walk in, take 2 photos, or you could take photos at home, and it takes your measurements using 3D Look. They're accurate. It creates a virtual avatar, digital twin of yourself. You can then choose what you want to produce. It could be an infinite set of complex patterns. The only constraints are really what textiles you want to use and how complex the design is. It goes into their PLM. You choose what you want to produce, the neckline, the sleeve length, the sleeve type, etc. You design your own pattern or choose a pattern to be printed onto it and see it rendered in 3D before you hit purchase. And then it goes to their digital printer, digital dryer, and cutter, and their software sends the exact setting to the Juki sewing machine to reset the foot pedal and stitch type. So all of that can happen within as little as 20 minutes. And the designs, everyone keeps on saying, oh, well, it's just for basics and t-shirts. No, you can produce whatever that you can sew. So, and really the textiles, pretty much any type of textile and even thickness can go through these digital printers. So it's a whole new world, and it just needs to be adopted. So we're working on creating a new financial model, because the biggest holdup is people investing in the infrastructure. That hardware is $2 million end to end. So how do we get this into factories? The factories are saying, well, we want this, but we don't know if the brands are going to be there to use it. So it's chicken and egg. And then if they invest and it takes forever to get the brands to adopt, it's a nightmare. So we're looking at a way to get that financed and create a subscription model, starting with influencers, to be able to produce their lines on demand across this network of factories that have this new model.
But Lisa, the problem with that a little bit is if I pay a factory worker in Bangladesh $2 a day, a $2 million investment is, I get a lot of labor for that $2 million investment, and that's what's holding out.
CapEx upfront cost is different than your monthly labor, absolutely. And yes, we've modeled it out, and the labor cost overseas is like $1.60 versus almost $18 here in the US. But when you look at the volume production and markdowns, it actually becomes 6% more profitable to produce it in this new paradigm.
So you talked a little bit, the end game, right? The markdowns, the overstock. Aaron, how do you think about sustainability from that viewpoint? What can a brand or a retailer do?
Yeah, and I think to touch on what Bjorn and what Lisa was saying, there's a lot of legacy brands. There's a lot of, sort of the iconic brands, that you will, that are having a hard time doing this. But there are a lot of small brands that are doing really well right now, and understanding that they need to sell what they produce. So they need to produce the best that they can. And when you've got disruptive brands in the sustainability area sector, like, Tact and Stone or Wise Made or Natum, Solguard, you think about Solguard, for instance, I'll just use that as an example. They create their product from ocean plastics, and they're finding they have an infinite source of materials. It's unfortunate, but it's there. And they're actually doing something to work with the problem. So I think it's the retailers understanding what the problems are, being educated with the likes of the things that Lisa and Bjorn are talking about, to have guide shops, to do, inventory management and only order and produce on demand or pre-order, keeping your SKU counts reasonable. You do not have to represent every color in the spectrum in your inventories. And those days, I think, are over. I think they're dangerous days, because what's ending up happening is all of this is clogging up this off-price model. And then these retailers that never saw themselves as off-price channels are becoming off-price channels. So the things that Lisa and Bjorn are talking about are massive issues that need to be handled from, policies and so forth. But there are small retail brands that are doing great things that these larger brands should learn from.
Yep.
Let's dig into that a little bit, Aaron. I think, as we think about these small retail brands, I think a few of you actually mentioned the circular economy. I think there's a lot of new business models out there. Can you guys kind of talk about the ones that you feel are compelling and the ones that are, again, just skin deep because they seem to be more sustainable in a way, or they sound like they're more sustainable in a way, but when you dig in a little bit deeper and you think about the pollutants that they're putting out there, whether it's from a dry cleaning perspective or shipping, shipping one piece all the time, it just, those types of things add up, and it leaves a massive carbon footprint on the environment. And so would love to hear your thoughts on the models that are working, the models that are a little bit skin deep, and where you see that going.
Do you want me to jump in for that?
Sure.
Yeah, so, there's brands that I've actually worked in, and I see it working, and I know that it works. Reformation, for example, there's a denim brand called Boyish here in Los Angeles that's really working to alleviate the mess that making a pair of jeans causes, whether it's the water, the dyes, so forth. You know, larger brands, when you think about Eileen Fisher and Patagonia, alternative apparel, you know, these are companies that actually are doing it. Montclair just got a lot of mention for the work that they're doing on sustainability and tracing back where they can. And I think Bjorn brought up a big problem is you can't find these places to produce a lot of these things. So you're either a smaller company or you're a larger company trying to make that impact. And I don't know, Lisa, Bjorn, do you want to add into that?
Sure. I think there's some interesting new platforms that have never really existed before, like Cala or Supply Compass, even Enabled and Zeisme. These are all platforms that basically allow emerging designers or brands to connect directly with a network of factories and see all of the sustainability, fair trade, all the credentials on each factory, along with getting pricing bid across this network and being able to pick and choose who they want to actually do the production. Cala is seeing tremendous growth. All of these platforms are, and it shocks me every day when I talk to executives from huge brands and holding companies, and they've never heard of these startups. They're scaling rapidly and they're deploying the paradigm that you say is not possible.
And Lisa, have you heard of Phoenix, FNX?
No.
It's out of Canada and it's a 3D printing model. And as you said, they could deal with any width or length and thickness of yarns and threads and so forth. And it's very interesting because you had talked about another platform that does that, where the designers, instead of having to create samples and samples and samples and samples, are able to 3D a lot of their line adoption and get a read on it before they've even made the stuff.
Yep. There's another interesting company I've been working with called the Moore Collective. The designer is the former designer for Fenty that launched Fenty. And then the woman, the CEO, worked at Club Monaco and in the industry for a long time. They've basically created a platform to bring emerging designers to market through influencers and their ambassador army to efficiently use Trendalytics to understand which trends map to which of their audience segments. They design and produce augmented reality avatars that these influencers can wear in some of their Instagram posts to get pre-purchases and full sell-through at 100% retail price before they produce anything.
So, we've talked about the production side, the supply chain side of things. How about on the other side of the logistics? Shipping, packaging, rental models. What do you guys think about vintage or pre-owned, the circular economy? Would love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, but I think, Avani, the more you get into these things and you realize, in doing research and looking at packaging, a cup of styrofoam takes 500 years to decompose. One cup. And when you think about the kind of packaging that's just being tossed away, not even at the retail store level, but at the production, at the shipping, at the distribution level, it's unbelievable. There was a thing I read about a shortage of cardboard that's taking place just given the pandemic. I think the pandemic has also caused a lot of excess waste. And hopefully that will, over time, go back to a place of recycling and restoring some of these things. But at retail stores, they get these massive shipments, or they're sending out things, and the least amount of packaging seems like the way to go directionally. And trying to make things prettier than they are just seems more wasteful than they need to be. And I think if you were to educate your consumer on why you're using a certain type of packaging or a biodegradable packaging or something that can be repurposed, I think that's a much better declaration for brands than, you know, showing up in a hard box that you're just going to toss.
Yeah. I agree. I think, so you mentioned resale. I love resale. I think luxury resale is especially interesting. It's kind of a whole industry that's been born out of overproduction and the consumer demand for access to these brands that are aspirational that they can't quite afford yet. So companies like The RealReal, I don't know if you've seen, there's a recent article I could share after this that talks about how their model is entirely upside down. There's way more efficient ways to do what The RealReal has been doing. And companies like Lapri, full disclosure, I'm on the advisory board, she has focused on really being the wholesale and auction back end for an existing global industry of consigners. Consignment stores have existed for many, many, decades now. And so instead of trying to build their own assessment, authentication, purchasing, holding, photographing, selling, marketing, retail, like the RealReal has with that crazy overhead, they focused entirely on being the digital layer for the largest network of existing consignment stores. And so they have more inventory than the RealReal, and the RealReal is now purchasing through them. So it's a really interesting model that is going to go more and more mainstream. And I can see companies like Farfetch, and even brands themselves looking to partner with these wholesale distribution channels so that they can end up controlling the front end retail of how their resale products are merchandised.
Well, I think, I mean, there's a lot, I think we all know, there's a lot of good things happening in fashion in general with new businesses, new business model. Although I don't call RealReal a sustainable company who's pioneering sustainability, because who doesn't want to buy a Chanel dress that is worn 5 times? It's like, I think it's a little ridiculous to call that a sustainability initiative. But anyway, I let them speak for themselves in that regard. I think the bigger issue is, and we lose track of it a little bit, so some of these things becomes almost like distractions to us. Because the real big thing is that we put 6 billion tons of clothes into landfills everywhere. We're the largest polluter in the world, with the exception of the oil industry. And we pay incredibly low salaries, causing millions and millions of people being hardly able to support themselves on the wages that are being paid. And that's what I'm saying. All the small solution and the new businesses are good, because that's the direction we should go. But we're not going to get there in 2030 unless we find universal solutions that fit every single business, whether you resell, use regenerative materials, recycled materials, whatever. Because we have to accept the fact we operate in a broken model. The fashion business is broken. The system doesn't work anymore. And one of the biggest changes here is the overproduction of supply of clothes in the world. The number of purchases per consumer has gone up dramatically since the 60s because of fast fashion. I'm not going to paint fast fashion as the big sinner here, but the idea that you can buy clothes for $4.99 and it doesn't represent the true value of the garment, that is like what we're dealing with right now. There's a race to the bottom in the fashion industry, and you can't produce it cheap enough. And simply put, people are buying too much clothes. We don't need all these clothes. We need to revert to old standards where I buy clothes as an investment. I pay money for it, but it's going to last me for a while, and I repair the clothes, etc. So all of these things are not going to happen until someone in the world, preferably, slams their head in the desk and says, enough is enough. You cannot start a business unless you guarantee that you're going to take back 60% of everything you produce, and you're going to recycle it and put it into the system again. You're not allowed to produce in factories anymore that are increasing carbon emissions in the atmosphere, etc., etc., etc. These are all the laws and regulation we need in order to get to our goal. We don't really have another 10 years to have a really pleasant conversation like this anymore, because it's not going to help us. In the end, this planet's going to go towards its extinction if we don't do anything. Sustainability is not a choice anymore. It's what you have to do. And unfortunately, people are not moving fast enough towards that goal. And I am a big admirer, just like Aaron and Lisa, of all these small creative businesses to find new ways of operating in a sustainable manner. But in the end, I turn around and look out the window and say to myself, how about the 85–90% of the rest of the fashion industry who is not doing this, right? And these are the guys that we need to bring with us in order to instill change. And that's why I'm saying I'm a pessimist, because I don't think the change is coming from within anymore. I'm sorry, I've been looking at this for 30 years, you know, and nobody's changing. We had a stint of organic cotton back in the 90s and it died out because it was just a fad. And I don't have the confidence that the fashion industry by itself gonna turn this around in time. And I think the discussion really need to focus more on it's not a game of coming up with new ideas and the changes we need are so dramatic that we really need global initiatives and we need global decision making, and we need a government to get behind this and really clamp down on this before it's too late. And I have no answers, so I profess I don't have the answers, but I work in an industry for the past 35 years that is, and I realize the model simply does not work anymore. And it's a very, very complex problem. And it starts with consumers and end with raw materials, kind of. And everything there between is just a pile of dung, okay? And so it's depressing to some extent. At the same time, of course, I'm also an optimist that I think we can do this and we can make the change. But I think the changes right now, the longer we talk about it, the more dramatic the changes have to be, you know.
Yeah, and Bjorn, you're absolutely right. You know, part of this is you're fueling sustainability through an industry that actually exists by selling more things.
Yeah.
And the difficulty and all of the things that you've just discussed, you know, a lot of it is watchdogs and auditing and accountabilities. And that's why, you know, when I said sustainability as a buzzword, it tends to be something that's cool at the moment. But the reality, and you said it, this is survival. It's survival of this industry. It's survival of the planet.
Mm.
And when you keep using, you know, 2030, I would be very pessimistic about that date as well, just given what this country's gone through over the last 4 years from an administration that isn't being held accountable for some of its environmental, you know, policies and so forth. So I completely agree with you. I don't know the answers either. I'm excited to be a part of this discussion. This sort of, you're asking the right questions.
For me, I think a lot of it has to do with the lack of capital for the right types of investments across this global industry. Um, the reason I started building Refashioned as a fund is the same reasons that BCG and Fashion for Good presented at Davos in January this year, that we need capital in this space. There is such a lack of capital, not to the tune of hundreds of millions, but 20 to 30 billion dollars needing to be deployed every year between now and 2030 just in early stage fashion supply chain technologies. And I was recently interviewed by The Economist talking about this, and they said, well, how much is currently being deployed? And I said, if I hazarded a guess, maybe 100 million. So we are exponentially far off the mark. And every company and every LP that's sitting out there saying, oh, well, I invest in impact and you need to have a social governance, just throw money at people that are trying to create the change. You know, holding on to it will do us no good when in 10 years we're out of time.
No, absolutely. And of course, we need capital investment. It's not, as I said, it's not inexpensive to go into sustainability. In every factory I visit in Asia, and there's a few A+ factories I've been to who are 100% sustainable and have extremely good CSR policies in place. And I've been in many of these factories. They are usually 20 to 30% more expensive than a regular factory, and that is what I call the true cost. You know, if I could produce with all these factories, I would do so. If I could produce jeans with my factory in Vietnam, who is 100% sustainable, give back to the community, enormously CSR compliant, and all those things I will give them to them. But our customer is not going to accept the jeans being 30% more. That's a little bit the dilemma. So in a sense, what really started this sustainability wave, and we are at the point we are today, is that the consumer sentiments in regards to what is the company's responsibility has changed dramatically in the last decade. So today's consumer, the younger consumer, holds us responsible not only for the product we do and also who we are as a company. All right? So that really changed the game, and that made a lot of corporate executives, and that's why they're running to Copenhagen for the fashion summit, because the consumer now says we care about sustainability. Otherwise, they would not show their nose there. Okay, guaranteed. So it's not, if you tell me that this is happening overall because there's a conviction among executives in the fashion industry that we need to do something about environment, I think that is BS. This is what's happening right now is because the consumer is asking for it. There's only two forces that can drive change, and it's the consumer and the government. And consumers are very hard to affect. And we can have another panel and talk about the standards we put in forth of the consumers and how hard it is for them to decode what is sustainability and what is not sustainability. And to expect that we can explain that to the customer is increasingly hard, especially as we have 150 different ways of measuring sustainability in the marketplace today, et cetera, et cetera. So we're facing some really, really tough decisions. So you can put your hope to the new young generation that they're going to change matters for us, hopefully in a very short time period, or you can put your hope to the government, because we live in a capitalistic system. It's a market economy, and profit goes before everything most of the time. So it gets very hard, and the capital, of course, required to invest into an industry is immense. And it's particularly needed at the manufacturing end of the businesses, because many of the manufacturers are old. Their facilities are old. And although they have water recycling plants and cleaning plants, and they have good toxic chemical kind of disposal, etc., it's still old factory. They still are not really carbon emission, efficient. But all of these are massive problems. So, I still believe that we can make a change. But I think unless we as an industry can come to an agreement of what is the minimum requirements we have in producing fashion, and because as soon as you impose it on one person, you put that particular company at a disadvantage, because they're going to have a higher cost than other manufacturers. So it's extremely complicated, and as I said, I have no solutions, only questions and rhetoric.
Yeah, I've been focusing on the solutions because I get your pushback, and I agree that government and consumer sentiment can create massive change, but we just frankly don't have the time
No.
for either of those to be the lever that
Yeah.
creates this change. So the other forcing factor is just building a better mousetrap. And it can be done, but it again comes down to the industry investing in their manufacturing infrastructure as partners rather than a commodity. And it is a massive shift towards a collaborative stakeholder supply chain and stakeholder capital, which I think that is our best chance within the timeline that's needed. So we've been working carefully on trying to figure out what that new financial model looks like so that it's possible to have a collective, collaborative infrastructure with shared costs to bring down the costs for everyone and catalyze this change faster than the industry is willing to do on its own.
Mm. Well, I do believe in recycling a lot. I think there is technology that's moving very, very rapidly in the recycling area. And I think that a reasonable demand to put on any fashion company is to take care of a certain part of their own waste by themselves, by putting it back into their production again. I think that's a reasonable request that this currently, and it's not too expensive because the waste we leave behind us is tremendous. I think it's a reasonable request to ask companies to use these new enzymes you can inject into plastic, which makes it break down in landfills in a natural process. I think that is a reasonable thing to do to avoid and of course combat microplastics in our oceans. And I think there's reasonable things we can ask the industry to do, which I don't think is too much hardship, etc. So I don't think it's game over yet, but I think the force, if there was 150,000 Lisa in the industry, of course we will have change, you know. But we need a lot of people who want to drive change, and we need them on the action, on the battlefield. We don't need them in academia or anywhere else. We need people who actually are willing in companies to do something and drive the process forward. And of course, I meet a lot of these people, and I think it's also a very positive sign of change. The question for me is, will this ecosystem that drives this planet still be in existence by the time we find the solutions? You know, I'm somewhat skeptical if we'll be able to do that. I mean, we already have seen signs in our environment, what's happened through the years with the deforestation and dying the barrier reef is dying, and you know, we have so many effects on the environment already, but it's not an eye-opener yet. And Aaron, yes, we had a lot of things happening the last 4 years in administration, but there was still 48% who didn't agree with climate change, you know. So there still doesn't seem to be an overwhelming majority in this world who believes climate change is real enough to take action. But I, at the same time, I'm hopeful because, as Lisa knows, technologies are moving very fast. If we could take this and put it on warp speed like we did with the vaccine, we will have a lot more results, I think, too, and a lot more money will flow into the industry, so we can actually finance all the research that we need in order to recycle properly, in order to produce materials that is regenerative, and we can go work towards this circular business model that like really, and take fashion down from number 2 at the list and put it somewhere around 25 or something like that, you know. So.
I'm going to ask for something a little forward here, but I know, Aaron, you work with a lot of brands. How many of your brands would actually be interested in collaborating with Gerber on proving out this sort of demand chain production?
You know, Lisa, I think many of them would be. Again, I think, as you said, it's whether they've been exposed to it existing or not. And of the brands that I mentioned and the brands that I work with, I think they'd be really keen on hearing more about it. You know, I think to Bjorn's part, when you're talking about brands too, they need to take responsibility. You know, the big word when I was growing up in these brands is a lifestyle brand, right? You want to have all things and be all things to all customers. And how can you do that and be sustainable? And I think the question also lies with the consumer, but with also the brands and how the brands envision themselves, you know, taking part in the world, and what responsibilities are they taking for all of the product they're producing.
Yep. I think the biggest
Actually,
shift.
Lisa, I'm sorry,
Sorry.
I'm going to interrupt you here just because we don't have that much time, but I wanted to, you know, have a quick discussion or ask all of you guys, what are your thoughts? And I know, Bjorn, you said you don't have the answers, and I know there are no answers yet or big solutions yet. But there are a lot of people working on it in different ways. And you mentioned the circular economy, so the idea of recycling. Lisa's mentioned the supply chain. Aaron, I know you've mentioned, you know, on the retail side, kind of thinking through the amount of product, the way you're selling product, the way you're merchandising in a guide shop versus a large footprint retail establishment. If for all the brands and retailers listening out there, I would love for each one of you to kind of give us a thought on a solution that you think they could put in place right now, or something out there that is working or that we should be striving towards, or they should be using to try to move a little bit quicker towards this effort, and this goal of being more sustainable as an industry. So I'll kick it off with you, Aaron, and then we'll go to Bjorn and Lisa.
Yeah, the answer to me is easy. In the short term is reducing your SKU and your assortments and looking at your inventory models. And again, getting a better read from your consumer on what they want and when, so that you're not in these over inventory situations that you're just creating more and more stuff. And then I also think with the rise of digital retailing, really looking at your overall real estate portfolio size, scale, and what you're expecting your retail stores for you to do for you, as part of a very quick project to be able to assess your go forward.
Bjorn?
My advice to anyone, and I see a question here from Amy York too, so I will answer that with my reply here. I think a very good start for any business is to CFDA's website and download the sustainability guide and their material index they have for responsible materials. Because if you have done nothing yet, the first thing you need to do is to orientate yourself on this massive thing called sustainability. What is it? What can I do as a small business or a big business? And I think education, first of all, is the first step towards something. The second step is just to have the discussion in your company. And I think anyone today who starts a business without considering sustainability is absolutely insane. You know, no investors really invest in businesses that are not sustainable right now. And I looked at many decks and talked to many investors, and I think sustainability is definitely a part of the equation now. And I think also, I'm also an advisor, Lisa, for your knowledge, to an on-demand model, which actually does not keep any inventory. You go on the website, you order something, you can do slight modification of your products, and it's produced to your order. That, of course, eliminates inventory sell-offs, et cetera, et cetera. So there's many good business model out there to select. And if you want to be a change maker in your industry, in your company, start being a change maker. Tell people not to buy styrofoam cups. Tell them there's plenty of biodegradable materials to use in your own office, et cetera, et cetera. Start with the small changes, make the small changes in your own business, be a driver for change in your own businesses, and educate yourself on sustainability. And if they listen, tell them, I have a great source for a sustainability strategy for us.
My advice for any brand would be to start with constraints. Brands tend to say, well, it's impossible to change our process to be sustainable because I designed this thing and then they can't make it sustainable. That's totally backwards. You as a brand should be accountable for your inputs and your outputs. So start with researching the best, most ubiquitous circular regenerative materials. Where are they sourced? How are they gaining adoption and scale? They are starting to, and we're looking to develop infrastructure to help that scale even more so. So start with your constraints and look at which products within your current lines can be produced within these constraints. Most brands would be shocked to know that, everyone produces some sort of t-shirt, long sleeve tees, short sleeve tees, asymmetrical. Look at what that most ubiquitous textile is and see how you can support the scaling of regenerative textiles by ordering that in volumes to replace what you were doing with organic cotton or raw cotton, because the cotton, we don't need to grow another darn thing. We're sitting on generations worth of textiles that need to be accelerated in their regenerative ecosystem.
Great. I know we can continue this conversation for hours. Unfortunately, we have a time constraint, but we have a few minutes for Q&A from our audience. So audience, if you have any questions, please type them in and we will get the panelists to hopefully answer any and all questions. But I am going to kick it off with the first question we got. And the question is, in Europe, from a packaging perspective, there are large retailers like the Schwarz Group, Aldi, Carrefour, etc., who are tracking to new sustainability laws. It's a big topic at the moment. So what are other ways or accelerators we can look for to increase the onboarding of sustainability?
H&M. H&M is opening up their sustainable supply chain through a platform called Treadler. If you don't want to take on the effort to source all the factories and figure out what their sustainability ratings are, reach out to Treadler. They are open sourcing all of their most sustainable partners to the world because they realize, you shouldn't keep this as your secret sauce. This is only an advantage that should be shared with everyone else. Great place to start.
Yeah, I already said what's an accelerator, and I think EU already using the best accelerator, which is laws. And EU is way ahead of United States in this regard. They are looking at regulation which will stipulate that all fashion manufacturers will have to, at some percentage, take care of waste that is generated by their businesses. Those things definitely accelerate sustainability and thinking, but the thinking in Europe is slightly different than the United States. So they're a little bit further ahead in all regards when it comes to sustainability. I just think we need to take EU and move it over to the United States in regards to sustainability and environmental impact, and implement the same rules and regulations here in the United States in order to have an acceleration here in the United States too.
Great. Aaron, anything to add?
And the only thing I would add to that is I completely agree with what Bjorn said, is there are countries and governments that are doing it better than we are, and we could learn a lot from them, and we should learn a lot from them, and we should be open to that.
Great. I'm going to ask the audience. Oh, we have another question. What materials and processes should we be using to build and design retail environments that are not already commonplace? Aaron, I think this is a good one for you.
Yeah, that's a great one. Again, a lot of it is looking at your overall design. I've been working with Gensler both pre and post, and actually pre and during pandemic, about store design, about materials, the kind of lighting, the painting that you're using, the repurposing of fixtures, looking at reusable materials, looking at materials that are easily cleaned, so that again you're lessening the impact on the environment with the kind of cleaning materials needed for flooring, things like that. And then also simplifying your architecture and design, creating things that are far more mobile, that can be used in more than one location. Just thoughtful space design and use of materials.
And
Great.
maybe old materials.
Oops, sorry, go ahead, Bjorn.
And maybe old materials. Not everything needs to be rebuilt. There's plenty of old materials to use, old furniture, etc. So.
Okay. One last question before we go here. As a consumer, how can we know what companies are producing sustainable items?
Good question. Good question. I always have a good way of doing that. The first thing I do, of course, you click about us on their website. And if they have a mission statement or something similar, and they don't mention sustainability, they probably not so interested in sustainability. If they mention sustainability and what they do, it's a good way to go and check that out. Do they use any sustainable material? How do they manufacture? Where do they manufacture, etc. But unfortunately, we miss this general classification of businesses. Like one is totally sustainable, two is somewhat sustainable, and three is not sustainable at all. We don't have that grade for the industry, and until we have that, the consumer doesn't really know, unfortunately.
And Bjorn, I'll just add a little to that. It's, it's kind of what you said earlier. There are business models that you can look to. So if you see companies that are, you know, produce on demand, those generally tend to be more sustainable because they're not producing as much overstock. And then you have companies like Nottam Cashmere who are rebuilding supply chains or Soul Guard. So I think, to your point, just kind of looking at what their supply chain looks like, what their story is, and how they operate on a general level is probably a good place to start. I don't think we have any more questions from the audience, which is perfect because we've hit our ending time here. I wanted to thank all of our panelists. Thank you so much for the time. Really interesting discussion. Hopefully, when we're back to discussing this sometime soon, there will have been some changes made. And hopefully bigger changes are on the horizon here. So thank you again for all your time. Hopefully, those attending learn something and we can all put this knowledge to good use and build something more sustainable in this industry. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for hosting, Avani.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, bye, bye.